interesting things about affordable housing, which I then fell in love with, and here I am today. So I am currently the Vice President of Compliance at Kittle Property Group, who is the sponsor for this panel. And we oversee approximately 18,000 units in 18 states, I think, right now. But that's me. This is Mike.
Hi, good morning. I'm Mike Ellis. I'm with Landowin Consulting. I've been consulting now for about 4 years, but prior to that, I worked for developers that built a lot of LIHTC communities over many, many years, and managed from the asset management position, helped with the development, helped with the construction side, and then also did property management, led the property management team, which also had a compliance component in. Now I'm doing compliance for whatever anybody needs from a standpoint of asset, property management, and compliance. I have some clients here in Texas, and again, I'm out of Kentucky now, but been here in Texas for almost 14 years, working for another company. So I'm very, very happy to be here.
I guess it's my turn. Okay. I'm Kara Poli. I'm with TDHCA. I've been there about 8 years, I think, if my math is right. But I've been in affordable housing for 22 years, and it's definitely something I enjoy. For those of you that see me online, you know that, and I'll talk about it any day of the week, anytime. Even if you're not interested in it, I will have my own conversation about it. So I'm excited to be here.
My name is Yvette Rodriguez. I've been in affordable housing for 26 years. Started in 1999 as a leasing agent at a Lisa property, got thrown in and learned the hard way, the crazy world of compliance, and I fell in love with it. Now I am the founder and compliance director of a compliance consulting company called Premier Compliance Consulting. My team and I, we oversee about 36 properties, manage their compliance, and we've been doing that for about 8 years now.
I'm Ellen Wilde. I am a tax partner at DOZ. We have a main office based in Carmel, Indiana, and we have another office in Austin, Texas. We do audits and tax returns and cost certs and consulting. So my role on this panel really is the tax credit impact number side, that kind of thing.
We're gonna have this really fun thing where we ran in with our little flags and be like, "Who's ready?" And then we realized that none of us really wanted to do that, so we all just kind of sat down.
We still have our flags.
We do still have our flags, so we partially, committed. We are going to go over a few different topics. This panel is going to be a little different. We're going to try really hard to not just read off slides. I don't know about y'all, but that's kind of boring at a conference and doesn't really start the day off well. So it'll be a lot of dialogue, a lot of stories, and personal input of our own experiences in each of the different roles. We will talk specifically about eligibility, which is different between a lease-up site versus a stable site, sustainability, as well as, unfortunately, the risk during all the different stages of the affordability period. That's like the side. So let's start with our pre-development and the initial compliance section.
Oh, this is me. So one of the things
your slides didn't have words, man.
Well, okay, a whole lot of words. That was a lie. I apologize. So one of the things that we run into for folks that are for newer properties where maybe you don't have an executed land use and restriction agreement is your on-site folks don't know what they're supposed to be doing, and so they kind of are just leasing apartments and hoping for the best. And so my little section here is kind of what's in your application, what's in the QAP, and how that's going to translate to the land use restriction agreement, and kind of to drill in the importance of making sure your on-site folks are aware of what the owner, what the developer promised and agreed to, and then how that's going to translate to operations for the property. So the QAP is the instruction manual. It's the qualified allocation plan. And that gets posted every year on our website. The old ones are still there. So if you're like, hey, I have a 2018 deal and I want to know why we have to do this. Well, the qualified allocation plan for that year is what to do, where to find that. If the land use restriction agreement's not in place at the time that you have your first monitoring review, we will use the application and the qualified allocation plan requirements to do the first monitoring review. Some of you guys are leasing up super fast. And so we're out there before all the paperwork side is completed. And you need to remember that what the owner agrees to on the application is what's going to be in that land use restriction agreement and what's going to translate for a monitoring review and how we're going to look at it. So we're going to look at examples of that. So I won't jump in there yet. And then the TINTAC did get updated recently to include that we would monitor using the application for funding and the requirements that were in place when the property was awarded funds. Okay. So this right here is where the application kind of indicates what the set aside is going to be, or what the is it going to be 40 at 60? Is it going to be average income? Is it going to be 20 at 50? So, and that's kind of, I think, probably the easiest part, because I think most people know when they develop a property, when they go into that they know that that they're going to be a 40% at 60% property, or they're going to do average income. So I think that's probably easier of the pieces, but that is something that translates.
For the 40, for the state side of it, are you guys seeing more average income now than you are the 40 at 60?
No, I think we've still got mostly 40 at 60 with average income.
Still being relatively new.
Still being relatively new, but not as foreign as it was 2 years ago
Right.
or so. Yeah. So the application also indicates how many points are going to be selected for amenities. And then the LURA has those listed with the points values. And that's more something that's going to get looked at on the physical inspection side versus our side, because they're going to, when you have a physical inspection, they're going to ask, what are your amenities, and it's going to be included there. The additional rent restrictions are also outlined in the application. This is one of the things that a lot of times on-site folks don't know and are not aware of. And so it doesn't help anybody when we keep secrets from the folks that are working on our properties. So, transparency is key, I think. And the more that you can tell them up front, the easier it's going to be in the long run. I'm sure these guys can speak from a, external compliance perspective. That when your on-site folks don't know that you're supposed to have, 4 at 30% and everything's leased at 50 and 60 and nobody qualifies for 30%, you now have a small problem when the big bad wolf from the department comes out to monitor. So this is a key piece that on-site folks would need to know. And the answer of, well, we didn't know what the owner promised is not really helpful, because it's the owner's job to maintain compliance.
Well, I think it's also important to note, like in the slide you just showed,
Mhm.
a lot of that information about the amenities is an upfront item the site staff doesn't particularly understand a lot of times, because it's just the way the property's built. When they get it, they get handed it. Here you go. Yeah, we've got gutters. We've got 30-year siding. A lot of that they're going to be like, but it's important to note that in this section, these additional rent and occupancy restrictions aren't in that QAP. So having them know the difference between those 3 documents is important on not only the long-term success of the property, but ensuring that you lease it up appropriately with the right amenities and with the right services in place.
Yes, thank you. That's a good point there. And that kind of segues right into this one with supportive services. A lot of times, folks don't realize that was promised. They think that waits until the land use restriction agreement comes out, especially folks that are maybe newer to affordable housing. So you've hired somebody great to manage your property or to manage your compliance at your property. But if they don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, then it's going to be kind of a jumbled mess. And supportive services have to start. We do look at those on our first monitoring review. So we would expect to see a plan with dates, or that some of the services have already been started. Depending on how early we're coming out, we understand that the focus is on lease up and leasing in the very beginning. But you can see here that this one promised 11 points. 10 of that is actual services from the list, one of those is the additional point that came out of the 2022 QAP and has been in all subsequent ones, that tells the owner that they're going to, or tells us that the owner has agreed to reach out to local nonprofit and health that'll support the health and well-being of the tenants at the development. And that's something that I think a lot of site staff is not being made aware of. And so they're not sure, they're not aware that they're supposed to be doing that, or the importance of sending out the letters. And I know there are compliance teams that, you know, really help their staff, their on-site staff do that. And then I know there are other groups that give their staff the tools and then kind of say, run with it, manage the property, be successful. And so this is why it's a key for your folks to know that. And you can see in the application that it's really not as wordy as the land use restriction agreement. So making sure that folks know kind of the particulars that are going to be required or included is really important, because if you just look at the application, it may not tell you all the details. You can see it's just 10 points of services. So if you're new to this, or you don't know what a land use restriction agreement looks like, it's going to be, you're going to be fighting a losing battle if you're just trying to pull services, what you think might be a service for a low income housing development versus what would actually be required. So special needs, and then the newest one, continuum of care, are also outlined in the application, and the owner selects which one they want to do, or if they want to do both. And these are a lot of times, I think, used in the more competitive areas to help kind of one owner get a leg up on others, maybe that aren't willing to do this or aren't planning to do this. And the reason this is important is because those units have to be held vacant, especially on the continuum of care. They've got to be held vacant for either 6 or 12 months. And that's going to be important for your staff to know, because they're going to call you super excited and say, we leased everything, it's great. And then you're going to say, wait a second, where are your 2 continuum of care units? And they're going to say, what are you talking about? I didn't know I had to have that. And so knowing what's in the application and knowing how that translates through the lease up process is going to be really key with this. And it's going to prevent having to say, okay, well, now when 2 households move out, you've got to hold them vacant for however long to satisfy that continuum of care, and for your on-site folks to know, or your compliance team to know, that they need to be reaching out to these continuum of care entities to get those referrals. And special needs, I feel like that's kind of an old hat trick that everybody's used to. But again, somebody on site that doesn't know, and maybe their last property had to have 5% and their new property has to have 10%. If they don't know that, they're not going to know how important it is to screen for that. Or maybe their last property didn't have any requirements and now they do, and they don't know to have folks fill out a special needs certification, or how important it is to track that in the unit status report. So I think that's why these are probably more important. Do you guys
Well,
want
and I
to
think they can sometimes, from an owner perspective, be a little forgotten about, especially if you've got this amazing property that is going to lease up in 4 months. You've got a waiting list. Everybody's been pre-qualified, but nobody knew that we needed to hold these units for 6 months. That could impact your lease up, especially if you're trying to lease up by the end of the year, if you haven't targeted the specific population that was promised. So just because it's 12/31 and you've got these 3 units left vacant, that doesn't mean you just fill them with anyone. You would still have to hold these units available during the time period that's needed.
Right. And the time period doesn't line up with a perfect calendar year.
Mhm.
So it's 6 months from the date of the, I think it's the certificate of occupancy in most cases. And so if you get that in November, your 6 months goes into the next year. So at 12/31, you're not going to have it. So when your on-site folks are frustrated with how the owner selected projects and stuff, you might explain to them also, hey, there's a lot of pieces that go into that selection. And we had to look at, that these weren't going to be ready, or these were going to be ready. At least that's how I justify it when I see weird project elections. So some of the land use restriction agreements have additional timelines or extended affordability terms, and that's also laid out in the very beginning in the application. And so for your on-site folks, this is probably less important because this is more of a down the road thing, because everybody knows for the first 15 years it's going to be super serious and it's going to be the federal term. But after that, they need to know that, oh, we still have to do services, or we still have to do this. And so you just want to be sure that the companies you're hiring to manage and the compliance teams and everybody that's kind of on the front end is aware of this, because 15 years goes really fast. And then all of a sudden you're at year 16 and you're thinking, oh, we're almost done. We can sell, or we can do whatever. And then somebody calls the department and finds out, oh, there's an extra 15 or an extra, this one I think has 15 years. And so there's extra time that maybe everybody forgot about because it didn't translate from that application into whatever system properties get set up with. It's been a long time since I've been on site, so I haven't set one up for a long time. The nonprofit and the historically underutilized businesses are in here as well. And that is something that I run into a lot when we monitor a property, and I'll say, oh, well, do you have your hub narrative or your nonprofit narrative? Oh, we don't have a hub or a nonprofit. Okay, well, you're supposed to, because it says, right here. And this one's probably harder to just find in the application. And some, like 4%, the nonprofit doesn't get listed in the LURA because it's not competitive, whereas a 9% it does. And then there's the other programs like home and stuff that might have a different type of nonprofit that's got to be involved. And that's all in the application. And so you've got to know kind of how to dig through that 200 and some odd page document to find this. And even for us, sometimes this is harder for us to find as well, because it does get kind of wordy on this page. It's not an easy supportive services 10 points or 6 units at 30% kind of a lined out.
Well, this is also important for a lot of the on-site teams have no idea what this part of the process is. And so expecting them to understand when the agency comes out what they're looking for as proof that this is being met, it's most likely going to be deer in the headlights. Typically it's a property management managed item. I know we have one of our hubs right now that kind of disappeared. Oops. We don't, but that's our problem, right? There's supposed to be a material participation. And from a long-term perspective, when you sign up to be a hub with an owner, it's typically for the period of the compliance period. And you got to materially participate. You can't just disappear. So something, again, if your site team isn't aware, they're not going to know, but this is one of those oddball items that they probably won't ever know what the role of this person is unless they actually physically come on site to do their budget monitoring or, engage in their requirements.
And I think the flip side of that, the other reason that your on-site teams need to know about this is they need to know who this strange person is that doesn't work for the management company or the owner that they're super familiar with. All of a sudden this person shows up who says, oh, I'm part of the general partner or whatever. And they're like, no, you're not. We don't know who you are. So if your on-site team isn't equipped with that, they're not going to give that person the respect and the information that they need. And then there's going to be that, oh my gosh, who are you? We don't know, that it just kind of helps prevent everybody from that awkward situation there. Marketing to veterans is one of the things that's required in the QAP, and that started in 2022. Actually, I think it started maybe earlier than that, but the current verbiage is from the 2022 QAP. And this is something that even if it's not in your land use restriction agreement, if it was in the QAP that you were awarded under, it's probably going to be required. So if you don't have a LURA yet to know for sure if this is going to be required, safest bet is to identify one veterans organization, send a letter out just to be safe. But this is something that there's not an election on the application to make. It has to do with where the development is located and how close it is to certain other items. But I think I've seen this in almost every land use restriction agreement. And I actually very recently saw this in another funding sources, land use restriction agreement. I think it was home or National Housing Trust Fund, and it was kind of buried. And so this is something important to look for, or be on the safe side and just identify a veterans organization, mail a letter. So there's other items that might be required that are, some of them are relatively new, like mitigation for school and marketing to a public housing authority, but those are also going to be in the qualified allocation plan or the application based on the year. Unit and development features are also outlined in the application. The owner says, I promise to put in Energy Star appliances and these ceiling fans and, you know, all these different things, which, like Patricia said, isn't super impactful for your on-site staff because that piece is already done. They don't have to know that. But then when a stove goes out or a dishwasher goes out, they have to know what the expectation is to replace it with, especially if your property gets certified with one of the green discounts like Energy Star or LEED. Accessibility, supportive housing, elderly limitation and preference, those are all going to be outlined and are things that are important to know kind of from the beginning, so that one, I'm a big proponent of, you know, giving your on-site folks the kind of the whole picture so that they are fully aware of what's expected of them and what's necessary. And it prevents that later on where you have a panic moment when somebody comes out from the department and says, oh, well, where's this? And then you've got, I'm sure you guys have all gotten phone calls from managers that are like, wait, I didn't know we were supposed to do that.
We got a question about the previous slide about a hub. How do you get rid of or replace a hub that is not materially participating other than to accept payments? So I know the answer, but do you want to answer?
Well, you'd probably have to get a LURA amendment, I would
Yes.
think. Yeah.
So you find another one, hopefully one that is in good standing. I would double check with the websites to make sure. And you would ask for a LURA amendment.
Yeah.
Pay your fee.
Yep. And then it would be somebody new and it gets uploaded and there's a new ownership chart that has to be submitted. Yeah, that's a good question. And we see that pretty regularly. And if the application was awarded points, it's not always a possibility to just have that hub dropped. Or if the allocation was made with a nonprofit set aside, you can't just say, oh, we don't want to have a nonprofit anymore, because it's part of the kind of the
That's why you
organic material of the community. So it is important. I think that's all of my official slides.
Watch out now.
I do have an example,
Yeah.
just to illustrate what's in the LURA, how important that is, and then pitfalls when there's breakdown of communication. We were doing a tax return for first year tax credit deal, and when you do your first year tax credit tax return, the owner will have to fill out the 8609, send that to the IRS, and then also send that to the state agency. This example was not from Texas, but we did the tax return, we computed tax credits. The owners were, happy with the tax credits on the return. But when we filled out the 8609, there's some elections that you have to fill out on the 8609 itself. And a lot of those are irrevocable. So we were filling out the 8609 and we're verifying with the owner what the set aside was. And they told us the set aside was 4060. So we filled that out. They signed it, sent it into the IRS, sent the copy into the state. And probably about a year or so later, the state caught that the set aside was actually supposed to be 2050 in LURA. And they submitted an 8823. They dealt with that with the owner. In this case, the set aside in reality at the project was luckily following the LURA. They were following 2050. Just the paperwork that we sent in to the state and IRS showed 4060. So what the state did was they issued an 8823, which is sent to the IRS to show that basically there was an issue with the set aside not being followed correctly. So, then a year or two after that, that was pulled for audit by the IRS. And so there was it ended up ultimately not being an issue because, like I said, the set aside was being followed correctly per the land use restriction agreement. Everything checked out, but it was pulled for IRS audit. And anytime you have an issue like that and there's an 8823, there is an increased risk of audit. It was cleared, but the IRS pulled, all the records to show that they were following the LURA and that the tenants were qualified at the right affordability level. And so it's a headache. It's standard course of business, but is a headache. So every time that you have an audit, they could look at your original cost, or they could look at, anything, not just necessarily that issue. But that was all just because we checked the wrong box on the 8609. And because that is irrevocable, then we had to go through a process to get that corrected. So now I don't let clients sign an 8609 without seeing the LURA with my own eyes and verifying that it was right, just because that's an expensive mistake to make.
We did get another question, Ellen, that we
Yep.
may be able to hit on, is when the compliance period is more than 15 years, how does it affect the resyndication?
Yeah, when the compliance period is more than 15 years, for that building owner itself, the IRS requirements expire after 15 years. The affordability requirements are going to go longer. That means you can resyndicate as long as your resyndication would take into account like the same affordability requirements. So yeah, you definitely can
It
resyndicate.
matters, but
It
it's
matters.
kind of, yeah. Marvelous. Who's next?
I think it's Mike.
Hey, that's me. All right. Okay, so
Do you have pictures as well, or is this just words?
I got some pictures.
Okay, great.
Actually, pictures of words and numbers. So, all right. So,
We just said that we're
right,
gonna-
yeah. So Kara took us through the QAP, and you got that finished. You did your application. You got an allocation. You got an award. You're working with your syndicator, your investment, and you got a limited partnership agreement completed. And you go and you have your initial closing, and you're ready to put a shovel in the ground and start building or doing your acquisition rehab and getting that work started. And that is all part of what's called the construction lease up period. Really exciting period. A lot of times the developer has been the only one that has been working on this up to this point. And it's like, hey, we're done. We've been working 2 years. Whew, that was a lot of work, right? And so as you heard from everybody up here talk about communication, it is so key, especially in this phase, that you are communicating from the developer to your construction team and to your property management team, all those requirements that are part of what you're agreed to here in the QAP, but also in that limited partnership agreement. From a standpoint of compliance with the state, they just want to make sure you get this thing done in their timeline. 2 years to build it, 2 years to lease it, general terms. But your limited partnership agreement is going to say, hey, we want you to deliver so many units in this month and so many units in this month. And it's all tied to the financial part of that equity that you're receiving on the front end. Becomes very, very important. When we don't communicate it, this is where we get into trouble, as when that construction team doesn't understand. And we got to tell the construction team all the way down to that site superintendent, because all they think about is like, well, I'm building this and you're going to rent it out and you're going to get rent. Okay, well, if you miss a month, it's only rent, no big deal, right? Well, guess what? Tax credits are normally more than the rent amount when you look at the tax credit value. So it is doubled. You're losing your rent, but you're also losing this tax credit value. And I have some examples we'll go through here. So communicate, in fact, over communicate. And you're going to hear that a lot, but it's so important. The properties that I've seen get in trouble is because we didn't do that. Absolutely, we did not do a good job of that. So one of the things that really works well is to have a handoff meeting. So the development team, and again, if you're a smaller company, the development team, the construction, property management might be all the same hat, right? Wear the same hat. But again, if you have different people doing this, you want to bring everybody together, have a handoff meeting, talk about all those QAP requirements, talk about the limited partnership agreement. And that agreement, you're making promises. You are making promises to that syndicator or investor. It's not just, hey, this is how we'll play in the sandbox. Yes, it is to a degree. But when it comes to the delivery of this construction lease-up period, which is called the risk period for a reason, because this is the highest risk that you have more risk, but this is where you can get real sideways and you can lose a lot of money. And I have examples of that as we go through this. So have a handoff meeting, ask questions. If you don't know anything about this deal, if you're in construction or if you're in the property management, ask questions. And as you gain experience, you're going to be able to ask better questions. And what we did, one of the best practice, we developed this handoff meeting, but property management or the asset management team wrote out all these questions that they wanted to know. You know, do we have this not-for-profit person in this? Do we have these type of units on this property? What is the set aside? And then after every meeting, we kind of added 2 or 3 more questions because the deals get more complicated. And there's more things to ask now. So again, that sheet, we have, hey, developers, can you just fill this out and give it to us? But we also meet about that and go over and ask more questions. But this is not a one-off meeting. During the construction period, you're going to have draw meetings at the very least. You know, have your property manager sit in that meeting. Again, that you'll hear things like how we doing on construction? Are we staying on schedule? When we're going to get units? Very important for management to know that, how they're going to be able to, you know, pre-lease those apartments. When do we drop a trailer, or how do we start our marketing materials so we get those electronic applications come in, right? So all those things are very, very important. And it's a meeting. Normally those draw meetings are about an hour, but you let your managers go to those meetings. Very, very important to do that. We have to understand that delivery schedule, that placed in service date. And turning on the credits, that's moving them in. That's the switch that